Hey folks, and welcome to another cracking episode of This is HCD. Way back in 2017, I caught up with Greg Bernarda, co-author of the best-selling innovation book, Value Proposition Design by Strategyzer. I've known Greg for a very long time, and in this episode we reflect on where things are at in between books and where he sees value proposition design and also the business model canvas in the current world that we find ourselves in. I truly respect Greg's mind and brain as one of the best thinkers around, and so too do Thinkers 50, a regular speaker at their events. Now we tap into the work that Greg has been doing around leading ecosystems, which is a bit of a different way of thinking about systems such as product systems or service systems. Now we speak about what business models look like within organizations, both at the macular and also at scale. So if you're working in spaces where you're trying to nudge that system forward to becoming more customer or human-led, I think you're going to get an awful lot out of this episode. Now, before we jump into today's episode, today it's been brought by our wonderful friends at MIRO. Now, I use MIRO nearly in all of my online training sessions with clients, and I want to tell you why. In today's digital age, remote work is becoming increasingly common. MIRO is built with remote collaboration in mind, enabling teams to collaborate effectively no matter where they are. Now, one of the features that I haven't actually used up until recently was the video conferencing feature from within inside the application. And this takes it to the next level. And I think you're going to like it too. So check out miro.com/podcast, where you can sign up for 3 free canvases for life for free. Now, let's get straight into Greg's episode. Greg Bernarda, I'm delighted to have you back in the podcast. We've spoken, you were one of the very first guests in This is HCD way back in 2017. But we were just chatting there about the good times where we had pre-pandemic, where we caught up in Dublin and showed you around Dublin, and even caught up with Jerry McGovern, which we'll chat a little bit more about maybe. But maybe for our listeners who've been living under a rock and maybe you don't know who you are, maybe start off, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from and what you do.
Yeah, good to see you, Jerry. A lot of things have changed, but not your glasses. I'm glad to see you.
They have changed. How dare you?
They have. Oh.
They have
All right.
changed. These are relatively new, but they're a nuance. They're a little bit different.
Yeah, I thought, yeah, okay.
You
They
still
fit you
look
well,
as
anyway.
great as ever though, Greg. You still look as great, like, tan, black shirt, the whole lot going on.
So,
where are you based now?
in Zurich, which is not really where I get my tan, but I do go in the mountains a lot for hikes. So based in Zurich, I'm from the French part of the country though. That's maybe what you can hear in the accent. I'm French part of Switzerland. Look, I mean, my journey, I started my career at the World Economic Forum, if you remember that. And I was there for 8 years, 2000, 2008. And I got really inspired by the idea of, we used to call it collaborative innovation at the time. And this was to, draw a contrast between when I joined, you had one person speaking to 800 people. And then we thought, okay, maybe the 800 people have something to say back and contribute to the conversation. And we got involved into all sorts of new formats and things, and to create what today we would call co-creation and community. Kind of looking at a topic more holistically. So that's where I started. Then went out and created my own practice, independent practice, applying this world of collaboration to questions of innovation and strategy. And in the process, I reconnected with a friend of mine called Alex Osterwalder, whom you know.
Yeah.
You know a lot of the folks around him.
Strategyzer,
Business Model Canvas, and all of this. And he invited me to be part of the second book in the series called Value Proposition Design. So I'm a co-author of this book.
Yeah.
And basically, in my practice, we can talk about what I'm up to today, but basically my practice helping people with reinvention, innovation, getting them to work together in new ways and to see new possibilities. I think that's one big part of the job, and then to enable them to act on it. That's the gist of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a brilliant summary of where you're up to. And we're going to be talking a little bit more around, I guess, leading ecosystems and the work that you've done at the moment. But just
Mm.
on the value proposition design piece, like I don't know how old that is now, maybe 8, 9 years old, is it? Something around that?
Uh, 9, yeah,
10,
9.
10, 9
Mm,
years old.
mm.
So, with the benefit of reflection, how would there be anything that you would have changed about that piece of work? Now that you see the world that we're in at the moment, what would you, or is there anything in that book that you'd say, actually, you know what, if we were to do it again, we might do it a bit different?
Hmm. The book, the subtitle of the book is called, um, so it's designing. Actually, I have to remember what it is, but it's creating things people want, something like that.
Yeah, yeah,
I would add a really in the sentence, creating things people really want,
yeah.
because, that's a personal, um, you know, um, bias of mine or sensitivity of mine.
Mm,
But I really feel that innovation can be focused on, you can do innovation for innovation, business for business. And
yeah,
nowadays, what I feel we need to do is really connect the practice, the power of innovation and business to what is really needed in the world. And there's just an immense amount of skill, capability, and power in with everybody around the world that's working in the space of innovation.
mm.
But sometimes I feel there's a bit of a distance between what is really needed, in the world. So I would add really in that title and
Yeah,
kind of a
that's really
that.
nice.
Yeah,
There's, we can automatically fall into the kind of the assumption that everything that we produce, as long as it's been validated and
yeah,
the desire is there, that they really want it. And
exactly,
that's not always true. Hence why we've got ourselves in the situation where you might have 10 different toothbrushes, or, all of these
correct.
different pieces where ultimately they do the same job.
Hmm.
So what's driving that? Like, with your experience now with leading ecosystems, and I love the fact that you're working into that space, which kind of lends itself to systems thinking and service design.
Yeah,
What is causing that need to create within the organizations? What's driving that?
in the organizations themselves,
Yeah,
what's driving that? Well, there is. There's obviously kind of an economic dynamic there where for a long time I think you could run a business with the same business model, and business model wasn't even a term because you didn't have to
yeah,
think about it. And so for 50 years you'd do the same thing, you'd be really good at execution, and you'd had your vision and mission plastered on the wall, and you just follow that, right?
yeah,
And then we kind of started entering an era, maybe 20 years ago, 10 years ago, even more, where things accelerated, and we hear it everywhere, things are moving faster, etc. So as an organization, as a unit, you can't just rely on the same thing, and you have to also think about what is next. How do I reinvent myself, and how do I
mm,
create new value in the world, in this world that keeps changing? And it used to be just a few sectors or a few companies. It used to be just startups. And now it's really everybody's lot. I think there's just a few industries that are still a little bit protected from that. Uh,
mm.
but I think there's an imperative for innovation nowadays, for reinvention.
It's funny because the old self of me would have been like, yeah, we need to innovate quicker and faster and stuff. But when you look at the older businesses that were relatively static as regards their business models, and they were doubling down on the execution and stuff. They weren't producing things that people didn't really need, just to lean into your kind of the subtitle in value proposition design. And the world that we find ourselves in now, in climate change, vast amounts of plastic being used, what does that look like in terms of the longer term? Like, has that acceleration proved to put ourselves in a better position than we were maybe with the static business model?
Well, so I mean, we've kind of followed. So if you follow this idea that every organization needs to reinvent themselves, that's still kind of following the logic of the organization, of the survival of the organization, right?
Mhm.
And the reason I'm looking at ecosystem, I was always interested in systems thinking because I feel like it's really
Yeah.
hard, at least in my head, to isolate, to do this feature
Exactly.
really well, but not think about the whole context and the system around it. And I feel that the entrepreneurs, the founders, the innovators that inspire me most have always, not a new thing, but have throughout the years have always had this perspective of let's not just think about our organization, but let's be in the business in order to have an impact at the
Yeah.
societal level or at the level of, however you want to define it, but at the collective level. And so
Mm.
if we don't do that, I think we just follow that logic. And like you say, it's more plastic, it's more externalities, as
Waste. Yeah.
economists would call it. And that there's something missing in that equation. Yeah.
There's definitely a lack of consideration around the end cycle of the experience and what happens at the end of experience. And there's a huge opportunity,
Yeah.
I guess, generally to, I think we spoke about this when we were in the car, we were driving around Dublin. I was like, there's a bit in the value proposition piece, or even in the business model canvas about the impact on the earth and
Yeah.
what does that look like. And that's the bit that I was kind of, I guess, alluding to in the gaps, I guess, like that we probably could
Yeah.
rethink to have a deeper sense of ethical considerations around what we create.
Yeah.
Um,
100%. Well, yeah. I mean, so the really one part is one way of opening that
Love it,
that
yeah,
space, right? But that's the space of how do I understand what people really want, and
yeah,
if I dig deep here, I understand that maybe they don't want 5 more toothbrushes, but they have needs, and they want to thrive, they want to be healthy, they want to enable themselves to be independent and all of these things. And if you pull that thread, then you get to really interesting and juicy questions for which we don't always have an answer, but that are really interesting to study in terms of innovation and to actually try and solve. But that's one bit. And you are alluding to
yeah,
the other bit, which is the bit of the creator, right? How, as a creator, how do I think of the system that I create in order for it to be basically healthy for nature, for society, and so on and so forth, right? And you see that a lot in business books. There's a theory that says, oh, do this and your business will be great. And then everybody's like, yeah, okay, but can we apply this to social issues? And then there is like a,
yeah.
a 2-page addendum or a leaflet after or something. But it's an afterthought. And what I feel is, well, let's start with that, because why, kind of,
Put it front and center.
ignore this thing from the start. So yeah, I think this new generation, I think, is kind of more naturally thinking about
Yeah,
this wider picture to start with.
I mean, I had a fascinating conversation with somebody yesterday, which I'll be publishing in the next couple of weeks. His name is Ben Dunn Flores, and he's from the UK. And we had a great conversation about challenging the home ownership model and how we can actually enable co-op schemes to own houses. It was a great conversation, and as we were just ending up the conversation and we were saying our goodbyes, I said, I have to ask you a question. Like, how old are you? I said, because his wisdom was from like somebody in their 40s. Okay, someone who's been through the
Mm.
process. He goes, I'm 23. And I'm
Wow.
like, wow. I said, your knowledge of
Yeah.
economics and your knowledge of this really complex system is
Mm.
absolutely sensational. And
Mm.
I've noticed that from speaking to lots of people, lots of listeners, and just generally people at conferences that I've been speaking at. The next generation, I describe them as having teeth. They're
Mm.
ready to sink their teeth into these problems and really shake the system. So they
Mm.
get a huge kind of rap on social media as being kind of snowflakes and all of these terms being bandied around. I completely disagree. I think the next generation are ready for the fight and they're ready to stand up for what they believe in.
Mm.
So it's really important for us in our position within the industry to be ready for that and to become enablers.
Enablers, absolutely. I love this
Yeah.
because I agree with that assessment. I think at least one part of the next generation. I think there are issues as well that
Yeah.
if you're not um, kind of if you don't know who you are and what you want, etc. There is so much noise and distractions nowadays. It's really hard
Yeah.
for young people, I find. So there's something we can do to help there. But for the ones that are ready to go, let's
Yeah.
absolutely enable them. Let's also connect them to, I was involved in another project, but enable the connection with the people in power that
Yeah.
are sitting in powerful positions and are also looking for new ideas. I think that that connection is important to make, you
Yeah,
know.
absolutely. And that distinction is really important as well. Like, I don't mean to have a really big brush and say everyone between these ages is going to be, up for the fight. And it's also a little bit of the conferences that I've been speaking at and the people that I meet and the people who listen to this podcast in particular are the people I contact to. So I guess the signal to noise ratio is somewhat a little bit different for me because I'm speaking to those people. But generally,
Yeah,
like every generation, they have their own kind of set of constraints and issues going on.
yeah.
So let's talk about your. I know we were back and forth in the last couple of days, and the title of one of the talks that you gave recently was leading ecosystems, not organizations."
Mm.
Where did this title come from, Greg? I love it, by the way. I love the title of it because there's a really nice distinction on the focus and the emphasis on the ecosystem
Mm.
versus the organization. But where did you see this need for this talk coming from?
Yeah, so it came from two places. One was this kind of lifelong interest um, of seeing business actors as part of the solution for societal issues.
Hmm.
It's just like something that, with the WEF, etc. We were talking about these things already, 20 years ago, obviously, and it's not new, and it's something that I feel needs to happen more and more, and that
Yeah,
the world is ready for. I think you need to explain it less to people why this is important, and so I kind of see this trend, right?
yeah,
Um, and the other angle is it was just seeing organization that feel maybe stuck, right? But they're looking for growth, they're looking to unlock kind of new possibilities. And if they keep thinking about, to use, the modeling language, if they keep thinking of just their product, their value proposition and the business model, well, they're kind of thinking inside the box, right? I feel,
mm,
yeah, in the same way that we had this transition from not just thinking about product, but thinking about the business model. That's a more complex
yeah.
system. Now
Zoom
I
out.
think there's a jump from, just thinking of the business model to thinking about architecting the ecosystem or being part of a new
Love it.
architecture of the ecosystem,
Yeah,
which allows you to do more and to unlock new possibilities for your organization too. So it's kind of coming from both.
yeah. They're like the components, the pieces that are required to enable that ecosystem to thrive. Is that
Yeah.
a fair kind
Yes, exactly. So,
of
so the way I think about it, if the way sometimes I introduce it is that there's kind of these three levels of innovation. One is the value
Mm,
proposition, and we had the value proposition canvas for that.
yeah,
Then you have the value proposition is contained within the business model, and so we have the business model as the
yeah,
canvas for that. And so your business model is also contained in a larger web or formula of value creation that has other components. So it has
the
other
ecosystem.
business models in there, has
Yeah,
infrastructure, has other things that we can talk about. And so if you want to unlock a higher, potential for value creation, well, you have to play at that level. And in the
yeah,
same way that there was a shift from, hey, if you have a product mindset, you can only go so far. Think
yeah,
about it as from a business model standpoint, and it unlocks all sorts of things. I think here is the same thing. If you don't just think about your organization, your business model, but if you think of that wider array of elements to play with, then you're going to
yeah.
unlock new things.
I love it. Like Mark Stickthorne, who's a good collaborator and a good friend of the podcast, who wrote This is Service Design Thinking, and This is Service Design Doing, those two great books, alongside other contributors like Adam and Marcus and Jakob. But he's got a framework called Journey Map Operations, where you talk about the different levels of Zoom within, I guess, the service that the organization delivers for the organization. At the very highest level is the management visibility that becomes ultimately like a dashboard of how the ecosystem is performing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when we think about that, and I probably should connect both these up to talk about this, because there's potentially some sort of collaboration or conversations to be had around that. What does that look like? Like if you're working at that more zoomed out business model, if you want, business model as being like the meat in the pie, and you've got multiple business models happen congruently, what are the bits that underpin at the Zoom level? Like that's the furthest out. What are those components that you see as being critical for the success of the ecosystem to thrive?
Yeah. So there's in the same way that you have 9 building blocks for a business model, I see that you have 3 essential things to play with at the level of the business model, at the level of the ecosystem. Sorry. So one is it's you want to think of the constellation of actors that you bring on board. And typically what we see again and again, when there is an ecosystem being created, ecosystems become buzzword now, the ones who are creating them don't care about industry boundaries, right? They don't care about the usual collaborations. They don't care about who your supply chain is, etc. What they do is that they align themselves to a purpose, and then they find the right players to come together in a new web of value creation. And so it's not just thinking about your business model, but it's thinking about what could be also the business model of all these other players, what binds them together to come together. And so you see unusual actors typically that by definition, right, people you would not expect. So that's number one. The second thing is, because an ecosystem typically, at least when you're transforming them, they don't have an infrastructure to support it. You're going to have, as the leader of the ecosystem, you're going to have to create that infrastructure. You're going to have pieces that exist here and there, but your job as an ecosystem leader is to build the missing pieces of the infrastructure and connect the dots, connect them together so that it empowers users, collaborators, etc. So ecosystem actors, infrastructure. And the third one is what I call communal functions. And communal functions comes from, I have this metaphor that an ecosystem leader acts like a mayor, as opposed to a CEO. A CEO looks after their own house, but a mayor has to look after the entire village, has to build the bridges, has to build the schools, etc. Some of these things, a lot of these things are not for profit. And so if you're an ecosystem player, you have to think about these things as well. So you have to sometimes inspire people. You have to educate or upskill or train, your stakeholders. You have sometimes to subsidize them. You have sometimes to enable them, Tesla giving their patents for free to the competition. So those are behaviors that are not business as usual. They're kind of a new behavior in order to match the new perimeter that you play in.
I love that mayor piece, and I'm actually stealing that right as we speak at the moment. I'm going to use that in one of my talks. The mayor piece is really nice. The distinction between the CEO and that mayor function. Who typically does the mayor function in the ecosystems that you're seeing and working with?
Yeah, so there has to be it could be a founder,
COO.
right? Is it? What's that?
Yeah, like a COO.
Yeah, but I think it has to be the top of the organization, because so it could be CEO and board, I would say, to have that kind of vision, because it's typically also that mayor function. Yeah, that mayor function has to be at the top of the organization. It's also a long-term effort, right? These ecosystems get built in 10, 15 years, not in 3 years. So you
Yeah.
have to have the backbone and the leadership to carry it forward. But
You're
what
bang
I
on. You're
was
literally
that?
bang on the numbers that I've seen. Like I just had a call with somebody
Mm,
who was chief level in one of the banks in Australia before this call. And we were talking about the estimated time for the transformations to occur. Like, and my previous case study that I spoke about was with Cochlear, the medical device business in Australia.
uh-huh.
And we pinpointed it to be about 10 or 11 years. But it's funny, this person who'll be on the podcast in a couple of weeks, it's like 15 to 16 years. He said that's how
Yeah,
long it took. And
yeah,
I'm like, wow, okay. I couldn't believe
yeah,
it. So it's funny, like two congruent calls saying exactly the same number. It's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. It's interesting. It it
It takes
it
a long
sounds
time.
yeah. It sounds like everything's moving very fast, but ultimately, yeah,
Yeah.
it takes time, yeah, to get
So
there.
things are moving very, very fast. And things are taking an awful long time to mature. What are the behaviors that you're seeing at the macro level, at the day level, at the minute level, that are the distinguishing factors for organizations to become successful? So, what are the things that these organizations are doing that's part of their DNA that ultimately will allow them to ensure that in 15, 16 years' time, they're going to be kicking goals? Hey, sorry for interrupting the episode, but I wanted to tell you about today's sponsor, MIRO. Many people connect it to just being another business collaboration tool, but for me, it's so much more. I use it to manage my own ikigai, to help me keep track of my own life and career. This one here that you can see won't get shared to anyone else, so it's a private board. Only I can see it. Now, the beauty of all this is I didn't need to create these canvases from scratch. People on the Miroverse upload them, and there's a constant stream of updated frameworks there for all us changemakers all around the world to use for free, many of which come with really detailed instructions on how to use them. So for more information, see www.miro.com/podcast, where you can get 3 free canvases for free for life. Let's get back into that episode.
Yeah. Well, I can give you my thoughts on this ecosystem,
Yeah.
keeping kind of with this ecosystem lens. My observation is that, and it's kind of congruent with the mayor analogy. A mayor doesn't have a
Yeah.
business mission. Normally, a mayor, if it's a good mayor, has a societal purpose, right? Is there for a
Mm.
societal purpose. And if you look at the ecosystems out there, Tesla could be one, Alibaba could be one, Intel in the 80s was one. There's many around. They typically define what they do in societal term, or at least in collective term, and they actually deliver on them as well. It's the
Mm.
this famous blog post from Elon Musk. I don't know if you've ever come across it.
Remember, yeah.
Yeah, 2006, and he was kind of giving you the steps towards realizing his vision. His vision was about an electric economy. It wasn't about building cars. And it's kind of the same everywhere. There's success defined in societal terms. So that's the number one thing. And then it's kind of doing it's shifting your identity from the organization to the ecosystem, means that you need to care for the prosperity of the ecosystem, right? It becomes part of your job. You can't just look after your own piece. You have to look after how does the whole succeed, as well as how do the individual parts succeed, not just yours. That's why earlier I was saying, you kind of have to help others as part of this ecosystem to
Yeah.
join this new world that you're creating. So those
Mm.
are some of the behaviors. And just one more I'll mention. There's also this idea of managing time frames in parallel, different time frames in parallel. So,
Yeah.
the 10, 15-year time frame, that's not a practical time frame. You have to have it. But you can't just like hide in a corner for 10, 15 years and then say, boom, here's the ecosystem.
Yeah,
So
pretty
what
much.
I see these businesses do is that they have this vision, they're very clear, but they kind of build incrementally towards it, kind of one business model at a time. So they build something practical that works in
Mm.
market terms. It's profitable, sustainable at least. And at the same time, it anchors assets towards the bigger vision. So it's kind of like, to keep with the Tesla analogy, you have cars, but you're building, one piece of infrastructure at a time, charging stations, partnerships, etc.,
Mm.
so that you can unlock new things, new cars, and the solar panels and the battery walls, and on and on, towards kind of this integrated system that is the
Yeah.
ultimate vision. Yeah.
So with leading ecosystems versus thinking about it from an traditional organizational perspective, those systems, and I know, and the listeners know, are complex. They're
Mm.
complex in their very nature. Um, when you have competing actors in there that might want to nudge in opposite directions, how do you handle that? Because I'm keen to understand your perspective on that. Because if you take the zoomed out look and you've got two business models going in opposite directions, how do
Hmm.
you manage that? Because you're trying to nudge them closer towards the same goals.
Yeah. Well, I answer in a roundabout way,
Well,
because
let's
that's
do it.
something. Because that's something I feel there's a lot of juice in this. So as soon as we as human beings, we see kind of a complex system, we have a tendency to think mechanically about it, to think about it in a linear way, meaning
Yeah,
that,
100%.
right? So
Yeah,
meaning, okay, so now what's the plan, and how are we going to get this actor to join and this one, and how do they get connected together? It's like a bit of an engineer's mindset.
yeah.
And what I feel we have to I feel we have to upgrade ourselves from this engineer mindset to more of an artist mindset. And all
Mm,
great artists are great, they know their craft very well. They're good at technical stuff, and all great engineers are artists, you could say as well. So it's not
mhm.
to categorize one or the other, but you have to have a new sense of how you're relating to the complexity of the object or of the situation that you're dealing with.
Mhm.
And so sometimes I have a little test that I ran, that I stole from, you must know him, Sagmeister, uh, in New York.
No,
You know about him? No,
I don't.
designer guy, and forget his first name now. But I was in a conference once in Zurich, and I saw
How
him
is it?
do this. So, Sagmeister, I
Any
forget his first
sideburns?
name. Zagmeister. Yeah, he's a Viennese designer based in New York. He
Okay.
talks about beauty. And so he ran this test in that conference. He shows you two Mondrian paintings. You know, Mondrian,
Yeah,
I don't know if,
yeah,
yeah, just, the lines, and the yellow, blue, and red squares, and a lot of white space.
yeah, it's lovely.
And yeah, so he shows you one that is an original one and one that is a fake one. You don't know which is which. And
All right.
and then he gets the audience to say, point to me the one that you think is the original. And 90% of the audience guesses, like, systematically. And they do, that's his explanation. And I feel really strongly about that too. They do because they recognize, you could call it beauty or elegance, wholeness, order, right? There's something in us as human being that recognizes when something is right.
Yeah,
And so he says the same thing about the painter himself, Mondrian. Mondrian wasn't trying to, try to align two lines together and put the blue box in the right corner, etc. He was just trying to get to something beautiful. And I find that's a great metaphor to deal with ecosystems, because you can't just, a lot of people are asking, what's the dashboard? What are the metrics, etc. And fine, we can go there, but you can't, if you go too much in that direction, you kill your own ability to understand how you relate to this complex object of ecosystem.
yeah,
And so, you have to think about the organizing principle of the ecosystem. If in the painting of the Mondrian painting is beauty, here in the ecosystem, you want to think of something like, what is the meaning you're trying to create? What is the societal vision?
mm,
How are you going to get to wholeness? How are you going to get to this sense of harmony where these actors are all getting something and being fine with it, with a new equilibrium
yeah.
they bring? So that's where I start with this question.
Absolutely. It echoes a conversation I had with Neil Theus, who's the author of Notes of Complexity,
Okay.
a book that is sensational. And I keep on mentioning it. People will be sick of me talking about Neil's work, but it was part of the keynote that I gave at Scotland this year around embracing the complexity mindset.
Mm,
And I have a deep fascination with starling murmurations and ant colonies.
mm, yeah,
And one of the appreciations, like you understand the principles of how they work. And when you start to have those understanding of the principles, you start to see the beauty in what's happening. So my
mm,
children who used to stand on the ants now stand back and they marvel. And I'm like, we know what they're doing, don't we? And we can
yeah,
talk about
yeah,
it.
yeah.
So it's really understanding the principles and the levers or levers on what is happening and understanding our own input and involvement and how you can disturb the ecosystem is really, really important.
Exactly.
So that's
And
kind of
yeah,
what I'm hearing in what you're talking there.
absolutely.
In terms of the understanding of complexity, in terms of leaning into the work, um, have you ever heard of Dave Snowden?
Yeah.
Dave Snowden, or
Mm,
so Snowden's work in and Stacey's work in what you're talking about here must be very important. It must be
yeah.
considered. Like the work Dave's going to be on in the podcast in a couple of weeks, so
Ah,
we'll be
awesome.
talking about some of this stuff. But when an organization has that visibility, that broader, I don't want to call it a canvas, but something that sits above the business model, who is that for
Or
within
is
the
that
business?
in what terms?
In terms of who are we creating
Mm,
that vision for? Like that, is it if it's a canvas, who in the organization do you feel is going to be the recipient of that visibility? So
yeah,
if the
to me,
business model is owned by the product manager or the
mm,
COO, whoever it is within that relevant department, who's the one out from? Who's going to be working it into that and who's going to manage it?
yeah. So it depends as an organization what role you're playing in the ecosystem. A
Mhm.
lot of these examples I've mentioned, Alibaba, Tesla, etc. They're you could say they're leaders of their own ecosystem. They create a whole new thing, and so they're the mayor of the ecosystem, and therefore the role is the founder, the CEO, together with the board, the highest level
Yeah.
of the organization, and that's basically this ecosystem is their strategic blueprint that should
Mm.
be everybody and everything in the organization should be aligned to that bigger thing.
Yeah.
It's not you know one thing on top of another. It's just the thing that we're trying to create.
Yeah.
But there's also instances where an organization is not the leader of the ecosystem, but they're trying to co-create a new ecosystem. Often, not everyone has, let's say, vision, power, legitimacy also in a certain
Yeah.
context to be that one actor that does everything.
Yeah.
Um, it may also not be the best way, right? To have just concentration of power in one
Absolutely. Huge
organization.
amount of risk.
Huge amount of risk, and also from a societal standpoint, you're
And bias.
concentrating a lot of power, a lot of wealth, etc. So I think there's other ways that are out there of co-creation, and one even with traditional players. So I've done a lot of work with Roche pharma company, right?
Yeah.
And so they're trying to go from just being, let's say, a drug manufacturer, to make it very simple, to an enabler of what they call personalized health.
Yeah.
And they realize, so, lots of new science, lots of technology, patient data, there's kind of a whole world that is changing where they feel they're very positioned to provide new solutions that are, for the very good, very strong in oncology. So it's not going to be about lung cancer or breast cancer. It's going to be about what is the gene mutation of this particular patient. And so to provide solutions to this. In order
Yeah.
to do this, hospitals have to work differently. Doctors have to
Absolutely.
prescribe something else. Insurance have to reimburse other things. Governments has to be involved in co-funding. So they can't make it happen, in other words, if the ecosystem's not aligned around it.
Absolutely.
And so one thing to go back to this, who is responsible for this? So for example, in Canada, they realize, well, we need to have access to patient data, but nobody is going to allow a pharma company in a multi-stakeholder society like Canada to own patient data. So what they
Yeah.
did is that they created a not-for-profit where they sit in the governance board of it, along with research organizations, government, and others. And
Hmm.
together they say, here's how we're going to collect patient data. Here's how we're going to create the rules by which patient data can be used. And that's a kind of a mayor function, but that's owned
Yeah.
collectively. So
There
there's,
was a great, yeah, I totally agree. And the work at Roche sounds super fascinating because the intent is there, the principles are there about what they're trying to achieve, and the time it takes to get there is really important. But to quote Patrick Quattlebaum, who I spoke with recently on the podcast, will be coming out soon, author of Orchestrating Experiences, he said it's not the time it takes to do something, it's the timing. And the
mm,
timing of the situations is really, really important.
mm,
So with an awful lot of the work that you're talking about here, around, I guess, nudging the ecosystem or
yeah,
setting up the components and the factors, where does the timing, how can we ensure that what we're doing, um, is aligning to the right time for the organization to do it? Because things can happen at certain times. The market fit isn't there. The
sure.
organization isn't ready. The consumer isn't ready. Whoever it is, what are the indicators for you in saying, okay, now is the time to do this?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think of two things when you mention this. Number one is, often we say it's not the right time when we have the narrow view of, let me launch my product or let me launch my business in a certain environment, right? And so we
Yeah.
check, is my idea ready for that environment? And
Hmm.
for all of these successful ecosystem stories, if you had applied that filter, you would have said, no, that's never going to work. The environment's not ready. When
Yeah.
Alibaba is trying to do e-commerce in China in 2003, there's no shipping, express shipping industry. There's no payment systems. So what would you say? Yeah, it was too early. It's not going to happen. But no, if you're an ecosystem leader, then you have to take a larger responsibility to create the pieces that are missing in the environment, so that your idea can thrive. So that's
Yeah.
one aspect of timing. The other aspect, I think, is, what are I would use this word, what are the fertile grounds where you see that there are emergent possible collaboration, that some actors are ready, not everyone, but where
Mm.
you can go and talk to them and have them back up your vision because they align with it as well. And I
Yeah.
think that kind of takes builds momentum, uh, you know towards the ecosystem, which will take a few actors, maybe not all of them or not all of the usual ones, because if you try to wait for that timing, maybe it's you wait for a long time.
Yeah.
So I would think of timing in terms of fertility of, you know where is this the right where is the right terrain to plant seeds and to cultivate these seeds.
Yeah. It sounds like you've hit an area, in your own kind of, I guess, knowledge, if you want to, you're focusing on something that's really interesting to you. I can sense it, like, and I sensed it when we were
Mm,
driving around Dublin, we were talking about some of this stuff, weaving the ethical considerations, really reflecting on what's gone before and what's potentially going to come ahead. What does the future look like for Greg, and Greg Bernarda, in terms of where you're going to take this knowledge work that you're doing at the moment?
yeah. So I was telling you earlier that I feel like this is a thread that I'm pulling and I'm seeing what
Yeah.
comes with it. But to me, it's kind of it's getting out of this business language a little bit,
Mm.
of, I think it's the business language that we have is a bit too small for the kind of problems we have. It's too small for our
Yeah.
time, for the kind of aspirations we have. And so for me, I want to pull that thread of reconnecting this world of business that is very practical and does things very well, very,
Yeah.
very efficiently, with the world of, the more subtle world of how are we sensing what needs to happen in society, how are we aligned ourselves with what we are feeling needs to happen, with also
Hmm.
this is the thing with, I sometimes mention this, you know a lot of people feel divided between their work and their lives. They kind of go, and it's like this quote from a Google that I've heard, anecdote, that the higher up you're in Google, the stricter you are with your kids in terms of technology access. So they're
Right.
kind of building a little monster here, and they're trying to do everything to protect their it's a bit of an
Oh,
exaggeration, but I think this divide is there in society. And so if you
yeah.
continue with this language of business, you're kind of cutting a part of yourself,
Mhm.
as part of what should happen, really, what kind of world you want to
Yeah.
build in a particular area. So I'm trying to reconcile these two things. So
Mhm.
that's, I think, to answer your question at kind of a macro level, that's what I feel we need: a new language, a new way of broader way, yet still practical way of embracing all of this.
And who are the collaborators that you're kind of looking to collaborate with to make it happen? Who are the
Well,
actors who use your language?
yes. What's my ecosystem?
Yeah.
Uh, well, maybe you, Jerry. We can talk more about it. Yeah, I'm saying this because I was inspired with what you said about the young generation earlier, and how
Yeah. Makers and doers.
yeah, yeah. I think there's a lot of potential here. So I am looking at um, so this language thing is kind of a thing I'm doing not on my own. I have a lot of people that I'm collaborating with, and so that we
Yeah.
can take this into different contexts. But then in parallel to that, I'm also exploring. So one thing that I feel is important is kind of how do we equip uh, this next generation, let's say maybe young or young adults. Uh, I'm always confused about generation, what generation it is, but
Yeah.
let's say
Join the
people that
club.
are, yeah, late university years, beginning of their professional career, and they're kind of sitting at a time that is quite important for them in terms of where they're going to go into life. Are they going
Mhm.
to end up in a organization where they feel like they have to do what they're told to do and kind of lose
Mhm.
their spark, etc., or can they embrace their own sense of, hey, this is who I am, this is what I feel I can
Yeah.
contribute here, and equipping these people with a sense of, one, connection with themselves, and two, ability to do this kind of thing that we're talking about. So do this kind of thing around how can I embrace a more things from a more holistic standpoint? How can I be practical in this? How can I build systems and communities and collaboration, and really steward this
Yeah.
this process towards building the kind of world that they feel inspired to.
Yeah.
So education is a
It's a
thing that I'm
huge
looking
factor.
at with some people. Yeah.
It's funny, I saw a quote from Obama recently about what he hopes for the next and the future generations to be able to achieve, and what advice would he give to them. And his response was, and it was somewhat sort of underwhelming, if you want. He said it was just get shit done,
Mm,
and be able to get shit done was his thing. And I was like saying, yeah,
mm,
okay, but there's a few steps before that that we need to really help them to be able to get what done. Like, really, like, like we can do, we can enable that, I think, pretty easily. But I think the ethical considerations and making sure that we're not compounding the problems that have gone before us and helping us design our way out of this situation is
yes.
really, really important.
Yeah.
The critical
100%.
skills, and problem solving and stuff. Well, look,
Yeah. It's
Greg, You are everywhere on the internet. Like, you are nearly as bad as me in terms of, I'm only joking. You're on LinkedIn. I know that because there's a great talk, which I'm going to link to from the Thinkers 50,
Yep.
which I saw did a couple of months ago. I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well, because, you cover an awful lot of ground, and there's some really nice visuals that probably complement the conversation that we have had today. But is there anything else you want to give a shout out to in terms of the work that you're doing? If there are people out there that you're looking to collaborate with on stuff, we do have a good listenership with multidisciplinary people. So give a shout out if there's anything you want to give a shout out to now.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. So the talk you mentioned, at the end of the talk that you mentioned on LinkedIn, I introduced actually something we haven't talked today about, but is kind of resonant with some of the thread of our conversation, is that at the end I'm saying it's not about disruption. We've been enamored with this term disruption, because disruption is interesting in terms of changing the status quo. But my sense of disruption is that it kind of moves value, or sideways. It moves value from this set of actor to this set of actor. And I like the term upruption better, because upruption kind of channels this energy of disruption. Yes, we need to shake things up, but we need to also guide it into a new place that's better for everyone. And so I have a page now, upruption.com, that I just started. And so people can go there. There's you can leave your email there, and I would direct people there.
Brilliant. Greg, listen, thanks very much for giving me your time this morning and chatting so openly about the work that you have done and are doing and are going to do in the future. You're always welcome back in the podcast. Just send us an email. We'd love to have you on, because it's fascinating speaking and understanding what's making you tick these days. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Jerry. Really good to see you again. See you soon.